Welcome back. Last episode's bauxite-related nonsense, combined with the rather excessive amount of hole exploration I ended up doing as a direct result of trying to figure out a way around it, ended up eating a substantial amount of time. So much time, in fact, that it is now early March, and as such, planting time is just around the corner. The good news is that my reserves of potted piggy proved to be sufficient to see me through the winter months, and I still have a substantial quantity of vegetables, grain, and adult beverages squirreled away for rainy days, so farming isn't immediately a priority. With one exception, and that exception is flax. It seems like every single project I want to do now involves heaping mountains of this stuff. Want to make windmills? Hope you have flax. Want to make a sailboat? Well, what do you think sails are made out of? Want to make fine linen undergarments for precisely no reason whatsoever? What a strange question to ask. Ooh, I hope you like flax because the alternative is leather and that conveys an entirely different message. Enter the fun minigame that is trying to optimize crop space in a greenhouse while also ensuring that all of the plants grow at the same speed, otherwise known as hell. You see, plant growth speed is governed by 4 factors. Light, which will be consistent for all plants, nutrient levels, which hopefully will be consistent, temperature, see previous, and water level. The most efficient passive hydration options I have are a roofed over area at 75%, if I want them in a greenhouse that is. This is achieved by having a block of water touch at least one side of every block of farmland. Easy enough. What's the optimal shape then? Why, it's that stupid tessellating cross design that you can never fit into a square, of course. This is straight up just a compromise between looking good and being efficient with no real room in between, so for now I have opted for efficiency. In practice, I highly doubt that I'm ever going to need to worry about food again, so maybe I will revisit this design once I have terra preta, but it's not like I'm going to be living in my greenhouses, so a little bit of jank won't kill anyone. Speaking of jank, you remember how at the end of the last video I was all like, "Herder, I'm gonna mine out the entire cave system because I want to, ha ha ha." Yeah, no. No, I am not. In fact, I'm fairly certain I'm going to run out of iron before the cave system runs out of copper. I did a little mining off-cam and got this from like maybe 5% of the surface area of that cave just by prospecting the walls and following the leads. Suffice to say that my copper sourcing issues are solved. Now I just need to figure out how to exist in the cave without developing multiple sudden terminal cases of death. This task is not helped in the least by the ambient dimension instability issues that the place seems to have. Obviously. Welcome to the first heavy temporal storm of the run. You might notice that everything is a little bit wiggly. This is due to the fact that the fabric of reality just got an all-you-can-ride pass to the local amusement park, and boy howdy, is it going to get its money's worth. Me personally, I'm just getting nauseous, and also perforated by the many monsters that the free milkshakes have attracted to my backyard. I was going to try and use this as an opportunity to farm out more temporal gears, but I forgot to stock up on band-aids. So most of the storm was just spent with me hiding inside the basement, which honestly isn't all that unusual. Moving on. During construction of the teleportational viaduct, I also found a new enemy, I think. It's called a bell, and even if it doesn't physically hurt my character, it physically hurts my eardrums, so it gets killed with extreme prejudice, and at the very least it gives me decent loot. But anyway, back to the real meat and bacon. Where do all these teleporters go? Well, the first one shoots me a moderate distance to the north, which is nice for my exploration needs, so that's solid. It also connects to yet another enormous cave system, which tells you everything you need to know about the next 6 hours of my free time, but we'll put a pin in that for now. The second teleporter slings me super far to the west in the middle of a giant mountain range that apparently has an insanely high concentration of penlandite, aka nickel. I have not the foggiest idea what I can use nickel for, but if nothing else, it might make for pretty decorations, so sure, sign me up. This second teleporter is also in a somewhat unusual location insomuch as it isn't buried 3 floors below the 7th layer of hell, so I can even use it to easily access the surface, if for some unfathomable reason I wish to harvest a bunch of glacial ice just in case I need to freeze myself even harder than I already am. Global warming cannot come soon enough. For better or worse, this cave system is also much smaller, and I was able to entirely clear it out just by casually wandering around for a bit. It's a shame I won't get any more bonus teleporters, yes, but at the same time I kinda have my hands full with the first one already, so it's no major loss. I will spare you the odyssey that is exploring the first cave and summarize.
You get nothing! You lose! Good day, sir!
Well, that's not exactly true. I found a lot of saltpeter. Whoopee. I found no teleporters. What I did find is this. This is basalt. Now, unfortunately for me, getting here was, shall we say, an extremely trying experience. And all of my armor is broken, I have next to no healing supplies, and the Y level is such that basically everything in the game two-shots me. Normal people would turn back. I am not normal people and have a secret weapon which will crack this thing wide open. And that weapon is the several dozen stacks of mining tailings with which I can stone monsters to death. Shining style. Great plan. This is why my parents sent me to college, is critical thinking skills like this. You know the saying, couldn't throw a stone without hitting 10 of, something that people bandy about when they're talking about how common a thing is? Well, interesting thing I discovered. Stone projectiles slide in this game, and from the sounds of it, there are at least 10 nightmare mobs down there eating my rocks for breakfast and asking for seconds in any given area. Neat. Now, I have a lot of rocks, and I mean a lot of rocks, but something tells me that this is not going to work. Yeah, no, discretion may be the better part of valor, but on a purely compositional basis, the majority of it is running away with your tail between your legs when the odds aren't in your favor, and I know when I'm beat. Or, in this case, death. They are called tympanic membranes for a reason, after all, and that reason is clearly to encourage people to beat on them with rusty mallets like they're a pair of dollar store bongos. One resupply later, and enter my solution. Arrows. Lots and lots of arrows. All of those bowtorns I've had to, dispose of has ensured that I have a rather ridiculously large supply of entirely disposable ammunition. And, well, yes, sure, it's slow and not terribly efficient. It's also not terribly likely to get me ganked, which is something of a priority at the moment. So with the blessed silence finally achieved, the Zerg of infinite monsters that stupid bell was summoning is no more, which in theory means that I could start cleaning the place out and pushing in. Arrows work fine for range stuff, but none of the mods here can fit through a one-block hole, so as long as I'm careful, I'm home free to just farm them Minecraft style. And I do that. And what do I get from my incredible investment of time and resources? Nothing. I get nothing. Except basalt. Now, sure, I have some ideas for a nice dark stone like basalt construction-wise, but beyond that, not much outstands to me as a likely practical application. If nothing else, the place does seem like it would make a fantastic mob farm, though, so I will have to revisit this later. Just by clearing out the place enough to light it up, I also got 6 gears, and I feel like with proper design, I could definitely get some work done farming out temporals. Unfortunately, with spring firmly sprung, I now lack most of the free time that I previously had to go gallivanting around the world looking for fancy rocks that I had when nothing was growing. Crops, after all, won't plant, harvest, and store themselves, and while my food reserves will hold out until that first harvest, it is going to be a tad closer than I would have liked. To that end, it's time for a second greenhouse. Nutrient levels in soil slowly replenish over time, and plants only consume one of either potassium, nitrogen, or phosphorus to grow, so the ideal arrangement would be to have at least 3 that you can swap crops between. Of course, the ideal arrangement would also have terra preta, which is not happening, or I could just farm them in an open field, which would be far cheaper and just as effective at this point, but most of the stuff I've done building-wise is aesthetic anyway, and I don't see any reason to stop that trend now. Speaking of building, there's going to be quite a lot of that happening in my near future. Say hello to the future grounds of one of my brand new manufacturing areas. Late game industry, and believe you me, there is going to be some serious late game industry to be had, takes up a rather inconvenient amount of space that my basement bungalow is uniquely unequipped to provide. being as it is in a basement, underground, and also chock full of storage, forges, kilns, smithing, and steel production. All of these things are going to need quite a bit of room to breathe, so to speak, and there is just so much stuff that goes into all of them that it makes sense to give each their own area, with a particular dedicated emphasis on storage. I am, however, beginning to regret establishing a standard for build quality, however, as the process of doing this is time-consuming, to say the least. Every single one of those large windows I'm constructing needs 15 clear quartz each, and clear quartz is in itself a relatively rare drop from quartz veins. Oh, and by the way, did I mention that the only reason I'm using clear quartz is because I like the cloudy texture, and that I flattened an entire hill so that I could build this on a nice, neat, level area? I could have made this entire place out of dirt and it would have functioned exactly the same. All of this is entirely unnecessary. Despite all of this complaining, the first real problem comes when I try to start putting a roof on the first stage of the building. And as to be expected, this is entirely due to my material selection practices. You see, I've come to the conclusion that of the woods I have available, oak wood is the most aesthetically pleasing in this context. You know, because classic Minecraft vibes. So that's great. Do you see any oak trees around here? No, neither do I. That's because there aren't any, because there weren't very many in the first place, and what few oak trees were present are presently either in my inventory or soaking into barrels of poo-flavored jungle juice that I use to make my leather supple and delicate to the touch. Did I mention that I also decided I like to build with entire logs of oak? Yeah! There is some good news, though. My first harvest of flax is in. Mostly, there are a few random bits that I haven't quite matured yet, but it's already June, and if I want to get another harvest in this year, I need to be planting again as soon as possible, so I bit the bullet and harvested a tad early. Even with that, I netted myself an entire jar of flaxseed and almost a stack of linen, so I feel pretty good about things. Oh, did I mention June? Yeah, it's June now. That's a bit of a time skip. Moving on. Replanting these crops is, of course, complicated by the third heavy temporal storm of the year, but hey, think of it as an added challenge with walking in a straight line, because I need to have that on my hard mode bingo sheet, yes sir. Now, the thing with oak trees are that they aren't all that rare, broadly speaking. The issue is the amount of them that I need relative to how much I can stack in my inventory. Case in point, this oak tree was enormous and gave me almost 15 stacks of logs. Cool. It's a bit unusual, most of them only go for 7 or 8, but still, that's like maybe a fraction of my roof's total supply of wood. Now I have to run all the way back to my construction site with it because I'm not going to be able to hold anymore. Doing this once is fine. Doing this 4 or 5 times starts to get a bit old real quick. But wait, there's more, for you see, what industrial area is properly equipped without industrialization? There isn't one, of course, it's a trick question. An industrial area without industry is just an area, and heavens know that I have plenty of those already. Now, to have real industry, we need power. Mechanical power. And that comes from precisely one thing in Vintage Story, barring debug tools, and that is the humble wind turbine. I'll touch on how those do their thing more in a bit, but for now all you need to know is that we need wind, and because I am me, I'm going to need a lot of it. Now, everyone knows that in order to find lots of wind, you have to go up into the sky, or just eat a large amount of bean burritos. Obviously, because that's where all the air is. The higher you go in the world, or the more bean burritos you eat, the more wind you get, and the more power you get out of said wind. In Vintage Story, this caps at around y equals 170 because reasons. Now, could I make a floating windmill tower and have a floating factory at y170? Yes, absolutely, but it would look weird. So instead, I'm going to make a massive tower in the sky to mount my windows on that will probably cost 10 times as much to make as the windmills would have in the first place, because if there's one thing you'll find in neurotic Goose content, it's responsible time management. Now, I was entirely serious about going all the way up to Y170 to build my windmills, but after a little bit of construction, I did a reality check and realized that such a tower would look utterly moronic, which pretty handily nixed that plan, so instead I contented myself with 146. Such a travesty. Anyway, this means that it's time for Goose's Mechanical Power Class 101. So, windmills spin when they get wind. The wind spins a shaft with a gear on it, and shoves a big gear in a circle really slowly. That gear is attached to another shaft that's been lubed up with a problematically large amount of bacon grease, and it will serve as the main drive shaft for all of my everything. That drive shaft then goes all the way down to the base of the factory, and from there will presumably get hooked up to stuff and do things. This is why I was so concerned about making a massive flax farm earlier, because each of these windmills, in order to function properly, needs a full set of sails, and each of those requires 20 swatches of fabric, which is very expensive, especially if your primary source of fiber is whacking monkeys over the head and braiding their pocket lint, which it currently is. Even with my earlier bumper crop of flax, I only barely had enough for 4 windmills worth of sails. Also, don't try and figure out how 2 windmills on opposite sides of the tower are getting the same amount of wind in the same direction. You're just going to hurt yourself. Okay, Goose, so what's the next pointless material shortage? Why, dear viewer, I'm so glad you asked. It's lube. And also glue, otherwise known as animal fat and tree sap, respectively. These are both used in large quantities with mechanical systems to make things move when they're supposed to and not move when they aren't supposed to, respectively. And naturally, I am plumb out of both. Also naturally, neither of them are a real walk in the park to get. They are instead a walk in the forest because sap only spawns on certain kinds of trees and replenishes very, very slowly, and fat only comes from certain kinds of animals, which are infinite, but you have to get them to stop moving first, and most of them would prefer to not do that. Conveniently, these needs dovetail nicely with my need to start stockpiling meat for winter again, though, so I can't complain too much. Or rather, I can, it's just marginally less justified. Speaking of hunting animals, welcome to How to Kill Bears with Goose. Step 1 of 1. Cheat. Bears, for all their many talents, are unable to climb ladders. You, as the player, suffer no such disability and can jump up to catch a ladder directly above your head and climb on top of it, presumably motivated by the extremely angry large furry tank coming up behind you. Bears, being the short kings that they are incapable of mauling your face off from this excessive height, and you, with your handy-dandy bronze spear or other weapon of choice, have no such issue. Punch down with the power of economic and technological superiority until the animals beneath you fall before your sharp and pointy blade, and congratulations, you have now solved bear fights. Just, don't mess up. This works on everything without a ranged attack, by the way, but it does assume that whatever you're attacking wants to eat you, so unless you manage to consistently tick off the thing you're trying to kill, you may have some difficulty catching them. One round of tree scraping, bear baiting, and wolf munching later, and I've gotten enough stuff together to make my first tool. This lovely little clanker is a sledgehammer, otherwise known as an automated ball-crushing machine that sometimes people put hot metal under, or something. While it isn't delicate enough to process most refined metal products, it can beat the slag off your iron blooms, and automatically produce metal plates without consuming any sort of hammer durability, and given some of the projects I have lined up, that is going to be a very important upgrade. It also comes with a fast mode if you gear shift it up a bit. That's probably not going to be something I can do regularly without a whole lot of wind. I have plans for making a transmission that lets me swap out speed and torque later on, but it requires too many gears to make right now, so we'll put a pin in it. The second clanker is our good old friend the ball grinder, also known as the quern. I touched on this a bit earlier, quite extensively, but now that I have wind power to do all the heavy turning for me, this sucker is going to be seeing a whole lot more grinding action in the future. It's also fully automatable if you're willing to build all the chutes and hoppers and chests and stuff to feed in items and collect the drops, which I absolutely am, so I foresee quite a lot of tasty bread in my near future. Possibly contaminated with bone dust, but who's counting. The final machine, though, is my favorite. This is the dual action ball crusher, which for some reason is called a pulverizer because the devs can't spell. It also isn't going to see much use until we start making refractory bricks, since it's only used to crunch up hard stuff like quartz and peridot, and those aren't going to be important until bauxite finally decides to rear its ugly head. But optimism springs eternal, and let me tell you, all of this talk of industrial revolution has absolutely gotten me
Nope.
Of course, said industrial revolution also means that all of a sudden a whole bunch of new ore types start becoming relevant for various reasons. Principal among these is coal, otherwise known as mineable charcoal. Coal, in Vintage Story, comes in two flavors: black licorice, which burns hot and can be used to construct fun things like explosives, and root beer, which is worse in every way and is also the only kind that I can find. It can be used to cook things for a really long time. That's really about it. Or, in the case of the forge, precisely as much time as every other forge-compatible material, despite the burn time for it being almost twice as long. This isn't a bug, apparently, it's just how the forge was coded. Go figure. Needless to say, I am going to be collecting large quantities of this stuff for reasons that should be apparent. But wait, there's more! All of this heavy machinery is useful and whatnot, but it doesn't really do much if I have to constantly be manning the stations, as it were. And this is where all that copper I got comes in. The Hellhammer can't be improved, because obviously you kind of have to give it hot things to process in the first place, but both the pulverizer and quern support the addition of hoppers to feed items into and collect process items out of their respective interfaces. Hoppers in Vintage Story are basically just Minecraft hoppers. They collect items dropped on top of them and kick them out in their internal inventory or dump them into a container specified by a chute. Unlike Minecraft, they're pretty expensive and require 3 copper plates each. Good thing it's raining because that hammer has got some work to do. Besides all that, I also make myself an iron anvil. This is a required upgrade for processing certain high-tier materials, cough, steel, but I obviously can't get those materials yet, so mostly it's just future-proofing with a side of me getting tired of sharing an anvil with the Hellhammer. I will also probably need a second one for the same reason, but for now, one is plenty. Next on the shopping list is lots and lots and lots of iron. This is not a big deal because I've already discovered several excellent veins of the stuff. I just haven't bothered mining any of it since until recently the act of smelting, refining, and forging it was so slow that it wasn't worth using in large quantities. With the Hellhammer in play, this is no longer a concern while your flint reserves last, so full speed ahead on the iron. Which actually brings up another unrelated problem that I need to probably solve soon-ish, in that I need a source of high-temperature fuel, and through a great deal of poor fortune have not found any black licorice coal yet. This isn't a major issue since I can use charcoal, but sustainable forestry, and by extension mass charcoal collection, is a little, well, let's go with undercooked in Vintage Story. You may have noticed that when I'm chopping down trees, I almost always bring a pair of shears with me. This is not a coincidence. Tree leaves have an extraordinarily low chance of dropping seeds when they're destroyed as part of the tree felling process, so if you want to collect large amounts of seeds, you have to break them manually. Obviously, if I'm going to be planting and felling hundreds of trees, I would prefer to not have to do this, so I did some research on the seed droppage mechanics, stubbed my toe on the Vintage Story ragebait forums, and fell down a rabbit hole deep enough to eat the Empire State Building and make it look like someone lost their hot dog down a sewer grate. Now, right off the offset, I wish to point out that having to manually break leaf blocks to get pine cones is silly, and clearly whoever programmed this feature into the game had never gone within 200 meters of a pine tree before in their life. But I also come from a world where the default behavior of a tree is to remain floating when the bottom log block is removed from it, so we'll just chalk that up to an artistic liberty and move on. Even so, that's not the problem here. No, the problem is that for many trees, the seed drop rate is too low for trees to propagate even after they've been trimmed harder than a sheep with a Brazilian, and for a few of the rarer hardwoods, the drop rate is so substantially below the break-even point that these trees are just not renewable. The idea here was presumably to make sustainable farming of these trees harder, but they just made it impossible. Given that there is a fully established mechanic in this game wherein players can take cuttings of fruit trees and use those to propagate said trees, this strikes me as a rather odd failure mode. Like, sure, trees dropping seeds makes sense on a basic level if you play Minecraft, and fruit trees are programmed a bit differently, but if you want to control how easy it is to propagate trees, you would be far better off if you, say, added a way to get leaf cuttings from leaf blocks and either retool the seed drop rate to be somewhere in between nice but rare, or remove them entirely. Take those cuttings, slap in soil fertility, hydration, RNG, and or climate-based success chances of those cuttings growing into saplings, and, maybe even reuse some of the already present farming logic, and bada bing, bada boom, you now have introduced forestry mechanics that are realistic, immersive, and make sense in the context of a game with a bunch of levers to control how easy or hard it is to pull off for any given tree in any given situation, without forcing all your dendrophiles to buzz cut a jungle with a pair of pliers every time they want to engage in sustainable forestry practices. Oh yeah, that reminds me. Now that all the wild fruit trees around here have vernalized and started bearing fruit, let's go and, do the forestry. As alluded to earlier, fruit trees work a bit differently than regular old wood processing trees in the sense that they actually behave like trees and will get taller, grow branches, and do tree things. Unlike regular trees, but not by much, they also don't drop any seeds, and instead have to be propagated by selectively cutting off branches and either planting those branches or grafting those branches onto an existing tree with differing rates of success. Grafting trees will produce multiple kinds of fruit subject to the property of the grafted branch, so you could even get, say, multiple kinds of apples from a single tree if you wanted to, which is how it works in real life, weirdly enough. This is a great system, and I have no idea why regular tree propagation is so scuffed in comparison. Now, I love the idea of growing fruit trees, and have always wanted to do that in real life, so as you can expect, I did a goose quantity of pruning, and ended up coming home with a full inventory of cuttings and fruit to play with. But anyway, back to the wood-based forestry. Since axes chop logs with a 1-to-1 ratio of durability to lumberage, the result of all of this seed drop rate weirdness is that the best trees to farm end up being the ones with the highest seed drop rate on a per foliage basis, and in that respect, pine trees are head, shoulders, and knees above the rest with a whopping 12% per branchy leaf block drop rate. Add on to this that pine trees grow in nice, straight, predictable lines, mature quickly, and produce a decent amount of wood, and they are clearly the only good option for mass farming. Enter stage front, the tree pit. Perfectly designed for mass forestry practices, this ugly little abomination is going to be my ticket to the Steel Age. Once I get around to finding the train. Somewhat unusually for farms in this game, it is made out of gravel and sand, because trees somehow grow fine on these materials, but grass doesn't, making it an ideal material for farming trees on if you don't want to bother looking for seeds in muck, or try to break grass every time you need to replant them. I, personally, do not wish to do either. Technically speaking, these rows of gravel planting spots should be offset from each other by 1 to increase the concentration of leafy branches, but in the grand scheme of things, I doubt it'll matter much, so don't at me. With all my iron smelted, and ducks, and saplings in a conga line, let's get some upgrades going. And the first on the list is a better armor set. Bronze lamella is decent and relatively cheap to repair, but it is fundamentally a compromise between light everyday armor like gambeson, which needs so much linen that it was utterly impossible to craft until recently, and a more heavy-duty option like plate, and that is not a compromise I need to make anymore. To that end, the next 2 odd hours were spent beating the absolute snot out of an enormous mountain of the stuff to produce myself a full set of extremely protective iron plate armor. This is strictly a cave and also temporal storm exploring armor set, because it has 2 downsides associated with wearing it, but in return you're basically a walking tank that can ignore all of the most dangerous damage types. It's also phenomenally expensive to maintain and repair by comparison, even with the help of a Hellhammer, and I will only be using it sporadically. Armor isn't the only upgrade I can make, though. With excesses of fire clay lying around, I can also make myself a fun little block called an oven, which, when combined with the obscene amounts of flour being passively produced by my automated cornage, lets me bake breads and pies, which are both calorie-dense, long-lasting food items. Pies, in particular, are great because you can stuff pretty much anything in a pie, and each slice of it will last 8 days before spoiling, regardless of what you put in it. The pie slices also stack and can be eaten with your hands, which means I no longer have to waste inventory space carrying around half a dozen crocks every time I want to leave my little bubble of food security. And with all this lovely new stuff done, I can get back to doing what I was working on in the first place all, 30 minutes ago. For you, at least. This took me a week. Anyway, construction, by which I mean collecting construction materials. Like quartz. Good lord, the quartz. The worst part is that I can't even use ore bombs to make this faster because I really like the clear quartz texture, and you only get clear quartz if you don't use explosives on it. I will definitely be getting some of them later for bulk copper mining and whatnot, but for now it's just going to be you, me, half a dozen pickaxes, and 60-odd slices of pie, so I hope you're comfortable. I did at least find cool things while doing this, though. In certain formations of ore, quartz included, you can get pockets of crystalline material, which, in this case, is quartz. These, I guess you'd call them geodes, even though that isn't technically correct, have a chance of spawning large solid crystals of whatever material they're contained in, which have zero practical use, but happen to be very, very shiny, and as such I will be going out of my way to collect them whenever possible. And in addition to fun crystals, I also got more than enough quartz from that vein to continue with construction, and, in this clip at least, finish up the windows of my windmill tower. I will probably want to go back at some point and do touch-ups on the exterior just to give it some depth of field and all that, but beyond that, lighting and some potential reworks to the powertrain, it's as done as it's going to get. And that, I think, is also applicable to this video. So, for now, I will simply say thank you all for your time, and as always, I hope you enjoyed.